So I recently tried to learn something about this guy Jordan Peterson, which is something that I'd been putting off because didn't seem interesting, honestly, because of for many reasons. It just things put me off, like the fact that he focused on or the media surrounding him seemed to be about like transgender issues or political correctness. And then it turns out that he was seemingly advocating for Christianity. And so all of these sort of things just put him out of my radar immediately. Like I wasn't going to look into it. There's like a million things to learn and read and do, and you're not going to focus on something just because it's being hyped, right? But now I went and watched one of his videos because he had something to say about IQ, and I largely agreed with him. And then I watched another one of his videos, and then I saw that he actually wasn't that bad. I mean, at least the one I saw. He did make sense, but it was like really I guess it was just really obvious, like what he has to say. But this is relative. I mean, it depends where you are. But one of the things that he talks about, which is kind of something that my own mind automatically did also in encountering a lot of these ideas in philosophy or in religion and reading about them, is the idea of putting things into a spectrum of order and disorder, or schedule and routine, and the opposite of that, which is like adventure and freedom and non-sacrifice and non-adulthood, therefore, which is childhood. And the way my mind conceptualized that was, on one side you have essentially Christ, which is similar to what he does, and on the other side you have the Buddha. And so over here it's like 100% social sacrifice and order, and on this side it's the Zen goal of being a child again. Like a Zen master will tell you, the goal is to become a child. And the way Jordan Peterson portrays taking up your responsibility, bearing your cross, it's to become an adult. So it's really the opposite of that. And he tries to get people who are sort of in the state of ocean, nebulous, as sort of like this bad thing. And you need to get into a river. You need to choose a river and believe in it and constrain yourself and sacrifice yourself, and you're going to suffer by surrendering all this freedom of the ocean. And Buddhism would go all the way in the opposite direction, as to become one with the ocean again and become the unconditioned mind, which is free from even language. It's that radical. It's to just become a state of mind which is so free of the specificity that it is identical to a bunch of other minds. So more unity, therefore, and less sacrifice, because it takes a different view in which you drop your cross. Suffering is useless. Over here, suffering is like the fetish. You're supposed to suffer. And so this makes a lot more, I think this does account for why the West has developed a lot more in terms of technology and economy. I do buy that hypothesis to an extent, unlike Sam Harris, who thinks it was just like incidental and Christian values have nothing to do with it, or little to do with it. I think that they probably do have something to do with it. And it's obvious to me that even atheists do hold, even though they will continuously deny it, they have very Christian metaphysics, even, in terms of, for example, closed individualism, as opposed to the open individualism that is actually implied by physics. So we do have a lot of this still being carried around in us. And Jordan Peterson is trying to get us more in that direction, it seems, but in a secular way in which you don't accept it as like factual. Obviously, you don't accept that some carpenter was actually special and miraculous in any way, but you accept the psychology of this helping in a game theoretic sense. It helps society, it helps people, and so on. And so where do I stand on this? I think that it depends on where you are. I think that a lot of people who need this are the sort of people who are unhappy, or who have to push themselves past the point where they don't want to push themselves. And so then they do need this sort of figure to, and this model of reality of self-sacrifice. Whereas if you seem to be going in the other direction, like you want more freedom, more happiness, then that's just as fine too. Maybe you are being, constrained too much in some specific way, and you need to come back to the ocean a little more of freedom. So it really depends on where people are in their lives. But I certainly wouldn't frame it like Jordan Peterson does, where the ocean is bad, because I think that he equates that automatically with nihilism and ambiguity, and you have no direction and you don't know what to do. But actually, if you go far enough in that direction, it sort of inverts. It becomes like raw, pure happiness. And he would argue the point is not to be happy. And at that point, I'm not sure what he's actually claiming, because there's several things you could be claiming when you say happiness is not important. One thing is you don't believe that mind configurations actually have objective properties. So someone who believes they have objective properties would say there are all these possible mind configurations, right? They have different shapes. And in the same way that this is a different shape than this and this, they have different properties. This has 3 sides, this has 4. This one is tilted in a different way. These are objective properties. In that same way, mind configurations have objective properties of how good they feel. So you could have a value here, like 10, negative 10, 5, whatsoever, right? Probably someone like Harris believes this. And then the problem is, well, the people who say happiness is not important, some of them are just skeptical of this. They say, this doesn't exist. This is made up, and it's an illusion. Physical configurations of minds don't actually have the property of affect or valence or how good it feels, whatever. These are just made up. Then there are people who say they're not made up. They may be true, but it's how could you know? Because by the point that you are a different experience, you're just remembering. And so you could have made it up. So they say it's just so leaky in terms of actually recovering the actual values that it's too difficult. It may be true, but it's too difficult. And so therefore, a better approach is not to try to calculate these, but perhaps to just embrace our humanity and our sort of ethic, and embrace a sort of Kantian ethic and rules, or something along those lines, as opposed to trying to calculate this. And then there are people who say, oh no, yeah, these are absolutely true, and maybe in principle we can eventually discover them and so on, but happiness itself is they wouldn't say this, they wouldn't admit to this, but what they're trying to do is actually become more happy by denying the value of happiness. And that's actually a very useful strategy that I would actually advocate. I would think that it's useful on the individual level. It's not useful to hold that at the meta level, because if you hold it for all conscious configurations, then you get like some evil system that is imposing needless hell just because of virtue. It had some notion of virtue, and then it's imposing needless misery on minds, which is unnecessary. So you shouldn't think utilitarianly on the individual level, but you should at the meta level. And you shouldn't at the individual level, because that's just psychologically stupid. Like, if you're hedonically intelligent, as you should be, then what you do is you don't cower from pain. You think, pain is awesome. I love pain. And anyone who doesn't love pain needs to grow some balls, right? You need to take this attitude, and that actually encourages other people to take that attitude, and it actually does reduce suffering. So that's just how the mind works. That's just human psychology. So you have to roll with the punches and, take that view on an individual level. So I just advocate for looking at things at different levels, and on different levels having different ethical systems. which is a bit more complex than just holding the truth of meaning as somehow supervening on everything. Like he tries to rescue meaning from this, from how it centers your organism. So you're an organism who survives based on developing a sense of meaning, because this meaning orients you, and therefore it's true in some transcendental way, because after all, the organism itself is what exists. And that's like really revealing a narrow-minded reality. Again, he's not thinking big atheist, he's thinking small atheist, like I'm trapped in a little planet and I'm like this little bounded soul who just began existing. And people think that. But if you're a big atheist, you realize like there are infinite mind configurations across the entire multiverse. And you don't just think in terms of what's going on with this particular little index of everything, which is, pretty arbitrary, pretty small. And nonetheless, it has an effect. It has an effect across the tenseless object. Causal relationships can be defined even timelessly. So there are causal relationships between this and whatever else is going on everywhere else. And you can't actually know the consequences of your actions because of just the chaos theory of it all. So how could you actually tell? Well, you can't. And so therefore, in this moment, you just act more practical, right? In this moment, just act practical. Just assume that it's a small world, but don't assume to the very end. Like you could always have in the very back of your mind, oh, yeah, I'm just playing this game. But in the background, it's something much bigger. I'm part of something much bigger, and it's not going to end. So yeah, that I advocate for holding two different views, both in terms of morality, one at the meta level, one at the narrow level. So utilitarian at the meta level, utilitarian at meta level, and then just rule-based, or sort of more stoic even, and not a pussy, and not looking for pleasure constantly. That's not a good way to live. More Kantian and Nietzsche, just combine all your favorite philosophers that are more on the badass side, as opposed to the sort of more sensitive, more depressive types. But at the bigger level, this should be implemented, preferably by something which is not itself conscious, so that it doesn't have to endure the misery. I mean, if the mind is configured in the same way that humans are, having that mentality of high avoidance of pain and constantly wanting pleasure, it's very, very psychologically tolling. It's a bad way to be, and this is a far more hedonically intelligent way to be. So Kantian or Nietzsche, whatever, this is at the narrow level of what you actually seem to be experiencing. All these markers don't work. At the more narrow, immediate level. And also in your mind, in terms of your physical picture, in terms of your ontology, in terms of, here is morality. Morality, you hold this, two different levels. In terms of your ontology, so in other words, what you believe about reality, you should also hold two levels. So you could hold both. You could hold the narrow level of your thinking about the social psychology of what you are, thinking about your particular location in time, seemingly, and playing along with it. I mean, you have to play along with it and embrace your humanity to an extent. Just be a human on this level. But don't be a human to the point where you can never reference the truth. And the truth at the meta level, the meta truth, the actual truth, I mean the actual ontology, which you shouldn't constantly reference, because if you're constantly referencing physical reality, you just kind of, that seeps into your human behavior, and then you sort of just tune out too much. And you shouldn't tune out too much if you have other particular goals as a human, like actually making money and stuff. So your goal is to have this, but then at the meta level, still be able to remember, like when this gets pushed to the edge and it seems like life really sucks, at least remember, I don't actually die. At least remember that physics implies that you don't actually die at the very least, and this actually turns out to be true. Experiences don't simply cease to exist because they're just physical configurations. So you're in for a hell of a ride on an ultimate level. At the narrow level, a whole bunch of stuff can happen to you. And so you can hold both. You don't actually have to make the trade-off, and therefore you can also have an equivalence at this level. And this is something that he does argue for to an extent, Peterson, is perhaps there has to be a balance, the Tao. So dance between these. So don't actually go into complete authoritarian surrender to a system, and don't completely just exist in this nebulous state of phenomenological pluripotency, where you could be anything forever, and then you just stayed in that state of complete freedom and complete unity, complete forever. That's what Sele tries to do in Neon Genesis Evangelion. And I always thought they were the good guys, but I guess it's just a matter of how autistic you are. If you have autistic traits, you like simplicity, and you're more biased towards, hey, wireheading isn't so bad after all, because it's just a simple thing, and it's just, let's tile the entire universe with this. And I'm still kind of more biased towards that side on the ultimate level, but on the narrow level, I certainly see the local utility of sometimes having to tilt more in that direction and causing you to collaborate more, especially for disagreeable people. You need more of this, and this could turn out to be a disaster if you promote this side to highly disagreeable, uncooperative people.